My name is Sienna Brooks, and before everything changed, I believed I understood hardship. Life had never been easy for my family, but we always managed to keep moving forward. What I did not know was how quickly a single moment could erase the future you thought you had. The rain that afternoon was heavy, tapping loudly against the window of our small apartment. I stood there watching the water slide down the glass in long grey streaks, feeling as if the sky itself was grieving with us. In the bedroom down the hall, my mother struggled to breathe. The air in our home smelled of medicine and quiet fear. I had just returned from my shift at the public library when my father called my name. His voice sounded different, strained in a way that made my stomach twist. When I stepped into the living room, I saw him sitting at the table with his head buried in his hands. My father had always been strong, the kind of man who worked endlessly without complaint. Seeing him like that felt wrong. "Sienna," he said quietly, "we have a problem." I knew immediately what he meant. For months our lives had revolved around hospital visits, medical bills, and the desperate hope that my mother would recover. My father had borrowed money trying to pay for treatments that insurance refused to cover. But what he told me next felt impossible. He explained that the men he owed money to had offered a solution. Their boss wanted to meet me. If I agreed to marry him, the debt would disappear. My mother would receive full medical treatment. Everything would be taken care of. For a moment I could not breathe. My father looked at me with eyes filled with guilt and shame. He said he never intended for things to go this far. He only wanted to save my mother. I asked the question that burned inside my mind. Who was the man who wanted to marry me? My father hesitated before answering. His name was Vincent Mercer. A powerful and wealthy man who lived far outside the city. An older man who rarely appeared in public after suffering a serious stroke. To him, this arrangement was nothing more than a transaction. To me, it meant giving up the life I had planned. But when I looked toward the bedroom where my mother lay fighting for every breath, I realized something painful. Sometimes life does not offer real choices. Sometimes it only offers sacrifices. And that was the moment my old life ended. I barely slept that night, replaying my father's words again and again in my mind. Every possibility led to the same conclusion. If I walked away, my mother would lose her chance at treatment. Before noon, a black car pulled up outside our apartment building. The vehicle looked completely out of place among the cracked pavement and fading paint of our neighborhood. A tall man stepped out wearing a sharp suit and an expression that revealed very little. He introduced himself as Ethan Rowe, assistant to Vincent Mercer. His tone was polite but distant, as if this meeting were simply another task in his schedule. He handed me a card with an address and calmly explained that the car would take me there if I chose to come. I chose to go. The drive felt long and strangely quiet. The crowded streets slowly disappeared behind us, replaced by open land and towering trees. Eventually, enormous iron gates appeared ahead. They opened slowly, revealing an estate that looked like something from another world. Perfect lawns stretched across the property. Marble statues stood along winding paths. At the center rose a massive mansion, elegant and intimidating at the same time. Inside, everything gleamed. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings. Paintings framed in gold lined the walls. The floors shined so brightly I could see my reflection in them. Ethan guided me through several hallways until we reached a pair of tall wooden doors. "Mr. Mercer is waiting in the library," he said quietly. My heart pounded as I stepped inside. Shelves of books stretched toward the ceiling, filling the room with the scent of old paper and polished wood. Near the window sat a large chair turned away from me. A man rested there, perfectly still. "Come closer," he said. His voice was deep but carried a faint strain. When I moved around the chair, the first thing I noticed was the dark mask covering half of his face. One side of his features appeared stiff, the result of the illness my father had mentioned. But his eye studied me with intense focus. "So," he said calmly, "you are Sienna Brooks." I nodded, unsure what else to do. He gestured toward a chair across from him. "You came here for your family," he continued. "Not for money, not for comfort. That tells me everything I need to know." His words were simple. No threats. No pressure. Yet I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Because once I accepted his offer, my life would belong to a future I had never imagined. I returned to the estate soon after that meeting. By the time I arrived again, my mother's treatment had already begun. The debt hanging over my father had vanished as if it had never existed. Vincent Mercer had kept his word without hesitation. All that remained was the promise I had made. My new room inside the mansion was larger than our entire apartment. The closet held rows of clothing chosen in my size, arranged perfectly as if I had always lived there. Everything about the place felt beautiful. And yet it also felt like a cage. Dinner that evening took place in a massive dining hall with a table long enough to seat dozens of guests. Yet only 2 chairs were occupied. Vincent sat at one end. I sat at the other. We spoke very little at first. Eventually he asked about my life before all of this. I told him about the library where I worked and the books I loved reading. Stories had always been my escape from reality. He listened carefully. I know something about loneliness, he said quietly. Over the following days our strange routine began to settle. We shared meals, brief conversations, and long stretches of silence that somehow felt comfortable. One afternoon I found him in the library with a book resting on his lap. Without thinking, I asked if he would like me to read aloud. He seemed surprised, but he agreed. As I read, his breathing slowed and his shoulders relaxed. When I finished, he told me something he had never shared before. Years earlier he had lost his wife and daughter in a terrible accident. After that day, the house had felt empty no matter how large it was. Money could build walls and buy silence, but it could never replace the voices that once filled a home. For the first time, I realized the man I had married was not simply powerful or wealthy. He was deeply broken. And slowly, without meaning to, I began to see him as more than the bargain that brought me there. Peace inside the estate did not last forever. One afternoon a new visitor arrived. The man standing in the entrance hall looked strikingly similar to Vincent, though there was something colder in his expression. He introduced himself as Caleb Mercer, Vincent's brother. His smile felt sharp and unsettling, as if every word he spoke carried hidden meaning. After greeting me, he went upstairs to confront Vincent in his study. I followed quietly down the hallway. Through the partially open door, I heard their conversation. Caleb mocked the marriage, suggesting Vincent had simply purchased a young wife to fill the silence of his home. But his true concern quickly became clear. He wanted to know if Vincent had changed his will. If Vincent died without updating it, the entire estate would belong to Caleb. The visit was not about family. It was about inheritance. Soon after, things in the house began to feel strange. The staff spoke in hushed tones. Ethan moved through the halls with unusual tension. Then the truth revealed itself. One morning Vincent discovered documents showing large amounts of money transferred from his accounts using a forged signature. Only one person had access to those accounts: Ethan. Before we could process the discovery, the door burst open. Ethan stood there holding a gun. He admitted everything without hesitation. His plan had been simple. Vincent would die in what appeared to be an accident. Caleb would inherit the fortune, and Ethan would receive his reward. But the plan failed. The housekeeper, Esther, rushed into the room and struck Ethan with a heavy candlestick before he could act. The police arrived shortly afterward, uncovering messages between Ethan and Caleb that exposed the entire scheme. With them gone, something unexpected happened. Vincent slowly began to recover. Without interference in his medication, his strength returned little by little. We spent more time together in the garden, walking beneath the trees and talking about the future. One quiet morning beside a peaceful lake, Vincent took my hand. He told me he wanted to start over. Not because of a bargain. Not because of loneliness. But because somewhere along the way, 2 broken lives had begun to heal each other. And for the first time since this story began, I realized something. This life I once feared had slowly become the one I wanted.